When Naja Nielson is not a visiting scholar at Stanford, she's head of TV and executive editor of the Danish Broadcasting News, an independent provider of news and current affairs with TV, radio, mobile, and online. Naja is a winner of several television awards and has over 20 years of experience in news media as a reporter, television presenter, producer, editor, and host of political debates. We're really pleased to welcome her to moderate our 3 panels today. And please welcome Naja as she introduces the first panel on sensors, screening, and signaling. Naja? Can you come along, all of you?
Thank you so much, Martha, for this kind introduction. Please come on stage. Yeah, I think, yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
First, I couldn't help but thinking about 20 years ago when I was a newly graduated journalist. I had my first job. And then I interviewed this professor that predicted that the internet would be a phase that would go away again. He was a very clever man in the University of Copenhagen. And still at that time, and that is only 20 years ago, you would talk about the so-called internet, the information highway, and stuff like that would be used as phrases in the news broadcasting. And when I heard the presentation we heard before, I had a little bit the same feeling that this, I think for the audience here, it seems logical and possible that this will happen, but still it feels very overwhelming as well. And we can't really, if we just remember the last 20 years, the development we had with the internet, that we will know for sure that we can't predict what will happen. But what we'll try today is nevertheless have some of the smartest people studying this development and even inventing it, tell us a little bit more about it and dig deeper into it. The first panel here will deal with different aspects of sensing, screening, and signaling. Both companies and individuals have or can have access to immense quantities of data, big data, and our key questions here will be what meaningful benefits do each of you in the panel think we can expect along the way while we develop the Internet of Everything? What limitations do you think we need to overcome to gain the potential here? And which insights do you have in your field of expertise that can help us all overcome these limitations? We'll first begin with a short introduction. You'll have 5 to 8 minutes, each of you, to present your thinking. And then we'll have a mutual discussion. And then there will be a room for Q&A as well. So please be active if you want to make a question and put a question to one of these capacities. Here to my left is Paul Saffo. He's a forecaster, a futurist, with over 2 decades of experience helping corporate and governmental clients understand and respond to the dynamics of large-scale, long-term change. He's managing director of Foresight at Discern Analytics and teaches technology forecasting at Stanford. Paul is a non-resident senior fellow at the Atlantic Council and a fellow of the Royal Swedish Academy of Engineering Sciences. Paul holds degrees from Howard College, Cambridge University, and Stanford University, and has written many essays in publications such as New York Times, Wired, Harvard Business Review, and a lot more. Yeah. No, I just maybe you didn't read, all their bios. So
there's a thing called the web.
I will read some of them aloud here, Well, our next guest is Rick Rommel, an entrepreneur, leader, innovator. He has built innovative businesses in several industries, both consumer electronics, retail, aerospace, and companies like Best Buy, Kodak, Hughes. He has served in many different managing and executive roles in both sales, IT, product development, and general management. Among other things, he's now a consultant at Sprosty Network, a firm of former high-level executives that help others with innovation. And then last, we have Timothy Kasbe. I would say you are this true global citizen and leader. Born Indian, has worked in Australia, India, here in the US in Chicago. And before you got your current job as COO of Gloria Jeans company, you might not have heard of that company, but in Russia, that is a big company. It's the #1 retail brand at the Russian market. Gloria Jeans company has had a steep curve of growth the past 5 years, operating now out of 11 time zones, 48 factories, and nearly 700 stores. That is big. Throughout his career, he has worked with technology-driven innovation. He has extensive experience with how to use big data to improve products, consumer experiences, and eventually the business. So first, we will hear each of your presentations, and Paul, we'll begin with you. Please take the stage.
Got a remote for me? Quick. What I'm going to do, just provide some context. If you can throw up my first slide. Cool. That's Rick. We could swap slides.
You can talk to mine.
Mine would definitely be better if you gave it. This is, I was thinking about this last night, and I dug around. This is a slide I did in 1997 for the communications of ACM. And I think it gives us context where we're at. And the phrase sensing, screening, and signaling, I think, captures exactly what the great challenge is of the next 10 years. Sensing creates the context. What this slide says is about every 10 years, a new foundational technology arrives that more or less sets the entrepreneurial stage. It was the arrival of cheap microprocessors in the late 1970s that set us up for a decade obsessed with processing, and the poster child was the personal computer. The 90s were shaped, in contrast, not by microprocessors, but by communications lasers, and it set us up for an access revolution, and the poster child of that decade was the World Wide Web. Now, I actually did this model first in 1994, so I speculated that the first decade of this century would be shaped by cheap sensors, and it would create an interaction revolution, and the poster child would be robots. Probably didn't get that quite right, but again, this was 1994. We're well into the sensor decade, and it's the interaction of these three things among each other that is creating the acceleration effect that we have today. And the revolution, to me, is very similar to the kinds of acceleration effects we had when PCs arrived, and of course when the internet arrived. And the word I would put in as a generic thing instead of robots is smart effects, a term coined by a friend, Harry Vertelny. He was talking about something very different when he was at Apple, but it's a world of intelligent artifacts, things with abilities to sense the physical environment and account for themselves. So that's the broad context. I think we're well into it. Of course, the last decade really was sensor-centric. That's the sensing part. The second piece is screening. And screening, to me, is we're developing a new way to think about information. This is a picture of the compact muon solenoid, the CMS detector at CERN. This is the device that pulled the data out that led to the Higgs boson. Just to give you some rough numbers here, you may have encountered this in big data talks. When this thing is up and flying, it's spinning off, spinning out about a petabyte per second of data at the sensor. Not all of that's captured. In fact, about 99% of it is thrown away. They're actually detecting 40 terabytes per second, and they're saving about 100 megabytes per second. This all gets distilled down at the end of the year, and at the end of the year they publish 15 petabytes of data per year, which sounds like a whole hell of a lot. But if you do the math and imagine that the total amount of data at the detector, the data that they actually sense at the detector, they've already thrown away 99%, but that 1% approximately equals a mile, then the amount of information published at the end of the year is 3/1000th of an inch. That is a serious screening process, that stuff is getting thrown out at every single stage. And screening is going to become, I think, one of the biggest challenges here. But it goes a step further. That's Claude Shannon, and of course an analog waveform. That the third aspect of this is signaling. Well, before I say signaling, we're on the edge of an analog revolution. The digital order of the last 50 years was an interregnum between two analog orders. And there's a lot of things, because sensors are analog devices, you're just doing A to D conversion behind the sensor. And the question is, where in the chain of this sensing, screening, and signaling do you do the A to D conversion? And we know there are lots of problems really hard to solve in digital space, really easy to solve in analog space. So the new unknown frontier here, we all need to go to the library and start dusting off some 50-year-old books and start learning more about analog technologies again. The signaling part comes in when you think about the volume of data coming off of sensors. Search no longer makes sense. Search as a metaphor made sense when there wasn't very much information and what there wasn't very important, like 2010. With the kinds of volumes we have now, we're going to have to come up with an entirely new kind of paradigm for how we interact with information. And I think that's going to be a signaling model when the devices, instead of us searching for things, the devices are increasingly telling us what to do. And it's a very different world. I mean, the Higgs boson, big deal. One of the details you don't hear in the news much is, how did they finally decide they had discovered the Higgs boson, with this tiny wisp of information, 3/1000ths of an inch of a mile of information? The scientists voted. They looked at the data and they took a vote, and there was a majority vote said, yeah, we found it, that's how we found it. This is an entirely different world. So I just leave you with the thought that perhaps we're really atom-smashing paradigms here. We are moving into this sensing, screening, and signaling mode. It reminds me of nothing so much as the latter half of the 1940s. That amazing nexus where an advance in computing intersected with a couple of other things, and in a very short period of time, we had Koopman, the rise of operations research, 1946, search and screening, his classic piece. We had Bertin-Shockley in 1947 with the transistor. Johnny von Neumann was hanging around in here. And of course, Claude Shannon, 1949, mathematical theory of communications. Let's pay attention to the products, of course, and what all this can do. But if you just look at that, we're standing on a whale fishing for minnows. We're about to come up some entirely new kinds of mathematics, some entirely new kinds of paradigms for accessing information. And hidden out there, maybe hopefully on this campus, speaking as a Stanford faculty member, is the next Claude Shannon. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. And our next speaker will be you, Rick Rommel, please.
Perfect.
Oh, that's mine.
Bring that up. Next chart, please. Actually, sure. I'll take it. All good. As an opening, I won't recover the comments that prior presenters have made about the size of the technology wave that's about to hit us all. You see the numbers there on the screen. Things like Gartner estimates about 30 billion devices will be in play by 2020. Janice notes that the cell phones that we all carry are multi-sensor devices. From a simple consumer point of view, retail point of view, we're looking at a tidal wave of technology that's coming at us, fueled by all the facts that you've seen so far this morning. What I wanted to dwell on a little bit more is the really simple, if what you've heard so far is the technology wellsprings of innovation, sensor tech, how it's making its way into products, I want to talk a little bit more about what does this look like in all of our lives? Because I think, Tim and I, we are in some ways the simple retailers that are the receiving end of this wave. So we worry about what is this going to look like for all of us as consumers and or citizens. And I think the first point I'd like to make is Anonymous shopping is probably a thing of the past. And just to call this out, one of the things that's made the web such a remarkably powerful shopping communication vehicle has been the fact that when you're on Amazon.com, it knows who you are. And in fact, as we collectively start to grant more privacy information, access to our social graph, and with this wave of sensors, more sensor information, the experience that you can provide to each one of you, given what the supplier, the vendor, the website knows about you, is remarkable. So that raises a couple really interesting issues. So we all have been guilty as a citizenry and consumers of slowly granting more and more information and ceding more of our privacy to online sites in return for what we perceive are going to be benefits. That's about to hit retail. And it's going to hit retail in the form of that cloud of sensors that we all carry, now that starts with the cell phone, is going to identify you. This started several years ago. Small applications like Shopkick. You walk into a store, they put a little geofencing area around the store, and it knows that you are there, and it starts to communicate with you. And it starts with a real simple of, here's a special offer. You'd expect as the store knows more and more about you, what it does with that information will change over time, which raises the issue of what do we do with privacy? I mean, it's one thing to give more and more information to those that serve you on the net. It's another thing to give information to those that are serving you in a physical store. So as I call out, security and privacy management are going to be, quote unquote, challenging for us all. Second point, all retail looks like consumer electronics. Forgive me, I've got a consumer electronics background, but as Janice pointed out, and as he whipped through the long list of products that traditionally have been analog that are now going digital, given the introduction of sensor technology, we're going to see an explosion of quote-unquote connected products. Intel said a few years ago, probably about 5, that if it draws power, it's going to be connected. Here it comes. What does that mean when you walk into a store? What does it mean when the consumer health tech department connects to the cell phone department, connects to the big screen TV department, which connects to your computer department? How does all that come together? That's a challenge, and trust me, the retailers on the far end of the supply chain are wrestling now with what does this wave mean for them and their consumers and customers? Which leads to the inter-product complexity will skyrocket. I don't know if any of the rest of you sat through this morning's presentation and went just, oh my God, look what's coming. It's marvelous, it's remarkable, it's transformational. It's also a little bit frightening. It's complicated. I think Alvin Toffler in Future Shock way back in the 70s, he said it out loud, there'll be an increasing hockey stick in complexity. And boy, you saw it here this morning, so far already. And that will take the form of certainly a personal cloud that you carry with you, but also the connected car, the connected home. You're going to see all those ecosystems start to come together in the form of an increasingly complicated consumer experience. And finally, what does retail of the future going to look like? Since we're sitting here in Silicon Valley, I know a lot of my venture capital friends will look at physical retail and predict its demise. In reality, think about retailers starting to harness the personal information that they can gather from you, such that they can begin to, with a combination of, I know it's you, and big data analytics I can finally bring to bear to customize an experience for you, you're going to see retail transform itself. Those that survive the next 5 to 10 years will actually provide a remarkably tailored, customized experience in store. And it'll be more than just shopping. It'll be all the experiential tests, try, provision, all the things that physical retail does in so many ways, better than what you can do online. So you can imagine the experience of the future being optimally customized for you. Think about the retail, it's the retail version of one-on-one marketing. And if you don't think the prediction holds water, here's somebody else's view of a similar prognostication statement. IBM. For those of you who don't know, IBM, is anybody in the audience from IBM? Good. Then I can steal their thunder. Every year, they come up with 5 predictions in 5 years. And this last year, and actually this year, one of their predictions was that in 5 years, buying local will beat online. I thought this was a remarkable call out. How many people in the audience have seen this? Okay, we're going to talk to IBM about their marketing. It's a really interesting set of confluence of forces that leads them to believe that as home delivery speeds up, and I can pretty much get anything I want right now, you know, kind of the optimization of shipping, as the personalized experience, knowing that the retailer knows who you are in store, starts to gain momentum. You put all that together, and you get a very, very different view of what the consumer expects in a highly social experience in a store. Augmented online, fully multi-channel, leveraging the personal devices and the information in those personal devices to give that retailer the ability to do something unique and remarkable for you. And that is not a compare and contrast to online retail. That's an augmentation of online retail. So you'll see the merging of all those forces, and I predict in the future, you're going to have a really interesting experience, such as you're starting to see in Sport Check there on the left in Canada. You know, I think they've got something like 800 screens in a reasonably small store footprint that do everything from giving you personal information on your device usage to interactive RFT tag-driven information on products that you are considering buying that match your shopping history, given that they know who you are. Stop. I'll end with that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Rick. And Timothy.
Yes, thank
Please.
you. Yes, my name is Timothy, and I work at Gloria Jeans company in Russia. We serve millions of customers every day across 11 time zones of Russia and Ukraine. We are the largest apparel retailer in both those countries. The name Gloria Jeans is very significant in the sense that for Russian people, jeans signifies freedom or liberty. And during the times of Soviet, they were not able to buy jeans. And a colleague from Poland who I had privilege to meet last night shared with me that when he was in Russia in the 1980s, a Russian gentleman bought their Levi's jean for 1 carat diamond. So it goes to show you that this really is a meaningful business in the sense that at the fall of Soviet Union, this business was started, and it's in a multi-billion-dollar business now. We call ourselves data and analytics business that sells fashion because we are into fast fashion, and with fast fashion, every single move you make, you can either make or break the business. And if you take one wrong step, it can really cost you quite a bit. Said with that, we also live to the mood of the teenagers. They're the fashion trendsetters in this day and age, and therefore getting data from all over the web, collecting, curating, and then figuring out patterns, trends is key to what we do. Therefore, I call it we are the data and analytics business that sells fashion. Just to give you a little flavor of my presentation, it's very practical. It's great hearing these thoughts about 20 trillion sensors and 44 trillion sensors, but you're going to get a view into a day in my life as to what do I do with all this sensing that we do every day, and how do we make sense of all the information that's coming at us. So it's a very, very practical example of a day in my life. But just to give introduction, we serve all age groups from 0 to 2 all the way to adults. Kids is probably 40% of our business, including underwear and accessories. And here is an example of really trying to sense what the customer is doing in our stores. And how do you embed that into the kind of product that you build? So we have sensed that our customers are shopping at different formats of our stores, and we have 9 different formats. And how do we get the right assortment and right product in the right place at the right price? So looking at how our revenue compared to our space productivity, We used to be about 2 years ago, just when I joined the business, we were about 200 to 300 square feet type area, and we're slowly moving more and more towards the 1,000 and 1,100 square feet area, because what we are sensing just traveling all around the world, including Brazil, Japan, South Korea, those are the three main areas we go to for sensing our fashion trends. We see that the customers are going more towards the larger formats. And then to create the number of styles that will not end up, us end up losing our shirt. And here we are with amazing fluctuation in terms of the number of products that we present to our customers. And then after we have created it, delivered it, sold it, what we find is that only 56% actually is what we made money off, and the rest of it was basically a long tail that did not return anything. So these are the challenges, and we are relying on technology to figure out how we can solve this type of wastage and this type of losses we are making. Therefore, we got a lot of experiments going on where we look at our entire output strategy and our input strategy in terms of how we're going to make the math work from where the customers are at to where our merchants are at, and how do we push the product outside. Because when we look at something like this, we see that as soon as you have made a buy of your inventory, there's very few levers that we have that we can actually change to in case the circumstance or the mood of the customer changes. Therefore, for us, figuring out what will happen is so important. And our expectation, hope is that with all this sensing technology, and without creating any more sensors, actually we have so many sensors right now, just looking at people carrying their iPhones, smartphones, and all the location sensitive information that we are getting. Just if we can translate that in the right way, at the right time, we can avoid a lot of some of these kind of challenges that we are facing today. So here we are moving into talking about density, and what we mean by density is how many products do you set up on a hangers per square meter. And even some math like that is so important because it has huge sensitivity in terms of our sales as well as our profit margins. And here we have different signals that are showing us that our densities based on different merchants' choices that they have made has actually gone down. Our initial prices have gone down by 30%, and the signal is showing that we are actually headed into the red area. And it happens to be true. So if you look at the analysis of collecting what our merchants put out there, what we deliver to the stores, what prices we set up, what inventories we had, and some of the actions that we have taken in terms of raising our prices, which is the red line, you see that the customer is used to it and they have waited for our markdowns to go in effect before they go and shop with us. And this type of sensing is reactive sensing, and the kind of sensing that we need is more of a proactive sensing, where we can collect all the past information, see what's going on right now in the business, then to make the smart decisions as to what pricing actions we should be taking. So we have analysis here that shows that we have unnecessarily increased our second markdowns at unprecedented levels, and another red signal is going up in our company. But then we have these type of issues happening as well, where last week we see that the central region, which is Moscow, is up 32% same store. South region is up 21%. Far East, we have stores near Japan and Alaskan borders, they're up 53%. And this is completely out of the blue, because when you look at the situation that's going on geopolitically in Russia today, we should be headed into a downturn. But what we found is that these are the places where there were government-sponsored rock concerts happening the night before, where they had created this campaign of "We are one with Crimea." And that boosted the morale of the citizens, and they went out all shopping and spent their money. So we have a problem in our business where, we need timely sensors, timely screening, and timely signaling to take the right actions. So how do you take this and then, tell a merchant that what you actually are creating is wrong? Your quantities are wrong, or your trends are wrong, or your colors are wrong. So I see, in terms of talking about some of the challenges, is that how do you this technology is moving very, very fast, but people and processes are not changing as fast as the technology is changing for it to be adopted. So having those conversations where merchant is the king, and they make the decision on what buy quantities you have. How do you go and present this information and make it digestible and help the business? The point that I have already made, which is we have enough information to make reactive decisions, and you've seen my reactive decisions. And what we are not seeing enough of is how can we look at this information and software that will tell us what is going to happen and what should I do, and help me get into that action mode early before the disaster happens. So our expectation is that while we have our nose to the grind here, trying to run our retail businesses around the world, some of the research that comes out will help us solve those problems. The clothing we make doesn't have any sensors in it, like the gentleman showed us earlier today, but we expect that to be the case, and we are highly concerned about how do you dispose of these sensors, and what happens to all the wastage, because embedding them and selling them is one thing, but on the sustainability side, we have not seen any solutions. So that remains our concern. So really, to summarize my pitch, we are excited to be in this day, hearing all the great research and development that's going on. But we are also expecting great things in terms of helping our industry with all that you all are doing. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, all three of you. I think you raised several challenges. The reinvention of analog. We have to realize that this is something we have to deal with again. The challenges of the privacy and the challenges of making sense out of all of this data and making the data predict stuff instead of telling us about yesterday. So I would like, for the minutes we have here, 10 minutes or something, that you would, if you could give us your thoughts on how we solve or how we meet these challenges, looking to the solutions. So we could begin with you.
Well, let's start with our other guests.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. We could actually start about that. How do you think we could meet this challenge of making sense out of all this data that you are getting in? And I think an important part here is how you make people follow the conclusions of the data, because I know this is a concern of yours that the data might show that you have to act like this or this. But the managers won't, do it or listen to the data.
Yeah, clearly. I mean, every dot you saw on that is like a $300 million hit for us. It's a huge amount of money to be wasting. But the biggest challenge is, how do we get people to agree to this? That all this information is there, and they have gone and done their own independent research. And they've made their decisions and made their. So I think that if we can have a laboratory that actually has simulations running, that will help the users, turn them into more of believers, into this. I remember when the electronic check-in came out at the airports. There used to be a lady that would stand at the Northwest airline and say, hey, would you like to check in? And a lot of people said, no, I want to go to the... But now, most people, that culture change has happened, and I think that we need that lady helping, our business partners to really look at this information in a way that's understandable and makes sense to them, and help with this culture change, which is going from I'm the expert. I know this field. I've had 20 years of experience in it. To then saying, the Spider-Man movie is coming out, and we're seeing 90 days out. We're seeing all this chatter, and based on the volume of chatter, we believe you should only order 100,000 quantities. With 90% certainty or something, and within 30 days we can see the level of chatter and maybe change the order. You have, our delivery cycles are 2 to 30 days, 2 weeks to 30 days. So you have room to play there. So those are the proof points that need to be built to gain trust of the business community to really make this useful.
You told me as well that you as retailer have to learn from your customers all the time, so
Correct.
that you have a system where if suddenly all teenagers in Brazil begin wearing red shoes, then this shoe will be sent to Russia. You will, copy it and produce it and have it out in the stores within 14 days or something like that, because you have to react.
We can do that 2-week process. If
Yeah.
we believe something is sitting on the shelf in Brazil that is going to fly off the shelves in Russia, we can do it in 2 weeks.
And that is very different in a fashion world where it used to be designers that were in charge of what is, popular. Now it's the customer, you were
Yes.
saying. Yeah. Okay, Rick? Do you have any thoughts of how to deal with this cultural challenge we have here?
Yeah, I'll stay away from the predictive analytics kind of an approach. As a trend that allows us to assimilate this wave of complexity, what's playing out now in the market is what we'll call is a whole bunch of really interesting point solutions. So you've got the Samsung watch, Nike Fuel Bands, you have the wrist health tech that's emerging. You see the home automation, home control devices. You see the rise of many of the health devices that Janice showed in his presentation. And they tend to be single point products with a limited data set, limited functionality, and that's how we start. So, it's interesting, just if you look across the Kickstarter, Indiegogo, fundable wave of crowdfunding sites, and you look under hardware, what you find is a whole bunch of interesting, fairly small technologies. They have limited functionality, but the consumer can get it. They understand it. It's accessible. It's reachable. So I think that one of the ways that we're going to move our way and evolve into managing this complexity is similar to what we've done on the web. We didn't start with very complex websites. They got more complex over the years. I would submit that our adoption of the sensor technology in consumer products will follow that same kind of small adoption wave, and eventually we'll work our way up to managing the cloud of personal devices that we carry with us that interacts with the home and the car, et cetera.
And it gets a little back to you. We grow as long as when we experience how it works, then we also get convinced and maybe courageous enough to take the next step, or
I think
to
you're right.
understand bigger complexities.
Test, try, and determine whether or not you like what you've done.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the exact same thing that's been playing out with privacy.
Yeah. Paul?
The last 50 years of analytics has been single-mindedly focused on how to get the most information out of sparse data. And data is no longer sparse. And the problem is that our mindset has us in a very dangerous situation where we are drawing the wrong conclusions. Short answer, my advice, buy stock in aluminum foil companies. I'll explain why in a moment. You can think about a relationship. There's data can have, data and a target can have 3 kinds of relationships. There can be causality, correlation, and coincidence. And of course, we're all looking for causality, and if you can't find causality, maybe we get correlation. As it is, what I'm seeing again and again, everybody suddenly has got all this data, and we have these tools created in an age of sparsity And people are drawing really idiotic conclusions as a result because they're confusing correlation for causality. And then at the extreme, they're saying, wow, you know, sunspot cycles really do correlate to purchases of Starbucks lattes. You know, there must be some hidden connection. This is why I said, you know, buy stock in aluminum foil companies, because this is just a full employment act for the tin foil hat crowd, you know, who believes in black helicopters and alien landings and the like. But we've got to, I think the bottom line is we got to really rethink our approach towards data in a hyperabundant world, because our whole instincts were how to take a tiny piece of data and extract the greatest amount of meaning from it. And you do that now, and you're just going to get a headache.
Timothy,
just one distinction I wanted to draw here is when we talk about data and these point systems that Rick mentioned, there's so much, the systems built for consumers are so beautiful and so simple and elegantly simple and meaningful.
We hope that's true.
And that has not happened on the enterprise side, you know. There is no such fluid communication that's happening like Twitter, you know, on the enterprise side, although so many have tried. And, you know, the motivation to engage and motivation to, you know, really sense what's going on at the edge of the organization, you know, at the point of sale or at the sales floor or the service floor, they're very difficult to sense in spite of having this, you know. So the question is, we need to differentiate between the consumer, where people are willing to give information and the systems are so beautiful and so easy to use. That change has not happened on the enterprise side, and there's a huge barrier to making this acceptable.
Okay, we're running out of time. You could all be, you know, it is your capacities that could speak all 8 hours. And we would love to listen to that. But is there any questions in the audience? Or please raise your hand if you have a question. Yes, please tell us your name first.
Here. I would like to ask a question of Paul, I believe. You mentioned that there are some digital things that have been very hard to do that are about to become really easy to do in analog. I'm curious to hear what you had in mind, sort of some examples of important problems.
Oh, well, examples of important problems, I can't give you that. I can give you interesting examples. How many people have wielded a soldering iron at some point in their career? Good. Well, anybody who's ever worked with a soldering iron knows there are certain circuits where it's just a lot easier with traditional analog components. I can remember one time at Xerox PARC, way back in '96, they were trying to build a circuit, and the digital engineers were going crazy, and there is this 60-plus-year-old engineer looked at him and went harumph, and went over to his lab bench and, you know, took a couple of pieces of electronics and just wired it together, and everybody went, what, you can do that? Pattern recognition is a classic. There are certain classes of pattern recognition problems that take lots of dancing in digital space, and actually in analog space are easier. The other piece here too is keep in mind that at this point the exponential curve of Moore's law. I'm a big believer in exponentials. I chair the future studies and forecasting track at Singularity University. Moore's law is a very special kind of exponential curve. It is a self-fulfilling prophecy exponential curve. At this point, the primary reason why Moore's law continues to grow is that engineers at this institution and others are told to expect it to grow, and so everybody hunts for the technologies to make it grow. That's part of what's giving us a blind spot on analog, that we're all so familiar with analog, and it's so easy to do things. We don't have to go back and rethink so familiar with digital, we don't have to go back and rethink analog. But what I will do, in the spirit of your question, I will get you some fresher examples. I run into it all the time, so I haven't really thought of the latest classic example.
This might be too simple. I'm a journalist. We tend to think of that
This
way.
is the old, I'm a journalist, I'm not good at pool, but I like to play for money.
Yeah, that is. But I would say that your example of retail being something physical where all the digital knowledge will well, if the store recognizes me and say, welcome, Naja, we have these offers for you, in addition to you've run out of milk at home, here's the milk, we already packed it for you. That would be something that feels very analog, and it has some analog processes, but still there will be in the back end a lot of digital processes going on. Is it this what you're referring to also, that we have to reinvent the physical and analog part of the world as well?
Well, I think his question was more at the technical level.
But I think in a broader perspective, you could say I think this is what you're predicting as well, that we're going back to more physical revolutions actually.
We can reinvent traditional processes using big data behind it to actually make it a lot more efficient and optimize it.
Well, we've always reinvented retail. Little over 100 years ago, the modern retail experience was driven by technology. The invention of float glass by Pilkington, which gave stores big display windows, and Otis and the elevator allowed multi-store things. So if you think of the history of retail, retail has always been finely tuned to the media technologies of the time: plate glass elevators, radio, TV reinvented in the 1950s. And of course, with each arrival of the new media technology, everybody says, physical retail's dead. We were going to order all of our goods off of TV. And as you so elegantly pointed out, it's like, no, quite the opposite.
I'm going to quote you on that. That's good.
Yeah,
wouldn't it be really, really hard to be forced to home shop through a TV screen? I mean, today, that would be so difficult.
But a lot of the folks in the venture community here in town tend to believe that's likely to be true. But I'm with Paul. I think retail has always reinvented itself, and it always will.
That's why venture capitalists sleep
I'm
like
finish
babies,
you here.
sleep for 2 hours and wake up and cry.
You will all stay around, and I will ask you to applaud the panel and then approach them if you have more questions for them. Okay?
Great. Thank you.